Christmas Eve in 1883 was supposed to be a night of lanterns, prayer, and quiet joy for Mei Lin, a 22-year-old Chinese woman who had lived her entire life in a small village near the Pearl River. Instead, it became the night she lost the last remnants of control over her fate. Her father, crushed under an impossible debt owed to a ruthless shipping merchant, made a devastating decision. He sold the marriage rights of his own daughter to a foreign broker who traded brides to lonely men in the American West. It was an agreement that broke tradition, broke dignity, and broke Mei Lin's heart. Mei Lin had always been obedient, gentle, and respectful, the ideal daughter, though never bold enough to imagine a life beyond the boundaries of her village. But as her father tearfully confessed what he had done, the foundations of her world shifted. She felt betrayed, frightened, yet painfully aware that refusing would condemn her parents and younger brothers to consequence from men who valued money more than human life. Her mother, trembling, tied a red ribbon into Mei Lin's hair, not in celebration, but in apology. The next morning, Mei Lin was taken to a crowded port. She wasn't the only woman gathered there. Several others, also Chinese, stood with their belongings bundled tightly to their chests, each with the same hollow fear in their eyes. A broker, a foreign man with a heavy coat and a voice full of commands, inspected them like merchandise. When his gaze landed on Mei Lin, he made a satisfied grunt. She was young, untouched, graceful, and had the soft features Western men tended to romanticize. Mei Lin felt her cheeks burn with shame. The long voyage across the Pacific was brutal. The ship smelled of fish rot, seawater, and unwashed bodies. Mei Lin spent most of the journey sick, cold, and praying silently to Guanyan for protection. At night, when the waves struck the hull, she gripped the edge of her cot and tried not to cry. She had no idea what kind of man awaited her. A drunk? A violent miner? A rancher who wanted a servant more than a wife? Stories from other women varied from hopeful to horrifying. The ship finally reached San Francisco, but Mei Lin was not allowed to stay. She was herded again, along with a handful of women, onto a train headed toward the rugged territories of the American West, a land she had never imagined, filled with snow instead of blossoms, guns instead of lanterns, and strangers who stared at her as if she were some rare animal. Her name was replaced with a number on the merchant's ledger. That number belonged to a buyer, and that buyer was a cowboy. The train ride seemed endless. The closer they got to her final destination, the colder the world became. White plains rolling endlessly beneath a gray winter sky, cattle grazing in the distance, and small frontier towns decorated with evergreen wreaths for Christmas. Yet everything seemed foreign, almost hostile to Mei Lin. The people spoke loudly, laughed suddenly, and stared openly. She kept her eyes down, gripping the thin coat she had been given. When the train stopped at a small snow-covered depot, the merchant finally called her number. Mei Lin was pushed gently toward the exit. Standing outside in the cold was Daniel Carter, a tall cowboy in worn leather boots, a wide hat dusted with snow, and a scarf wrapped against the wind. His posture was calm, his expression unreadable. He looked nothing like the frightening men Mei Lin had imagined. In fact, there was something unexpectedly gentle in his blue-gray eyes. But that didn't matter. He had paid for a wife. She was here because she had been sold. The fear remained. Daniel approached slowly, not stepping too close, as if he understood her anxiety. The broker handed him papers and took the last of Mei Lin's documents. Her name, her birthplace, even her age were written in neat ink. Papers that now meant she belonged to this man. "You can call me Daniel," he said softly, but Mei Lin did not answer. She merely nodded, unable to speak, unable to trust, unable to breathe. Daniel didn't touch her. He simply gestured toward a wagon waiting nearby. As they rode away from the depot, Mei Lin's hands trembled on her lap. She watched the snow swirl over the prairie, the sky darkening as Christmas Eve approached. She wondered if her family was thinking of her. She wondered if she would survive this new world. She wondered if Daniel would be cruel, demanding, or worse. Daniel finally spoke again, his voice quiet over the wind. "You don't owe me anything." Mei Lin looked at him, confused. His words didn't match the situation. He had purchased her, hadn't he? What else could he possibly expect from her? But Daniel didn't explain further. When they arrived at his ranch, a modest but warm-looking cabin surrounded by fenced fields and a barn. The sky was completely dark except for the moonlight glowing on the snow. Lanterns flickered in the windows. It was peaceful, almost beautiful, but Mei Lin felt none of that beauty. All she felt was dread. Daniel helped her down from the wagon but kept his distance, never reaching for her arm. He opened the cabin door and stepped aside politely so she could enter. That small gesture, one that most men wouldn't have considered, surprised her. Inside, the cabin was warm, the fireplace crackling. On the table sat a small, wrapped package with a sprig of pine tied to it. Daniel nodded toward it. "That's for you," he said. "A Christmas gift." Mei Lin froze. Why would a man give a gift to a woman who had been forced to marry him? What kind of gift could change a fate she never wanted? And more importantly, what did he want in return? That unanswered question marked the beginning of a story no one in the West would forget. The night Mei Lin arrived at Daniel Carter's ranch, fear clung to her like a second skin. The journey across the ocean and the forced contract weighed heavily on her mind. Every step she took inside his warm wooden cabin felt uncertain, as if she were walking into a place where she might be trapped forever. Daniel noticed, of course. A man who lived alone in the harsh lands of the American West learned to read silence as easily as words. He saw the way she kept her hands folded tightly, how her eyes lingered on the floor, how her breath hesitated every time he moved, even slightly. But instead of pushing forward, he stepped back. He understood something no broker or buyer seemed to. This young woman had been through hell. And no decent man should add to her suffering. So he let her have space. The fire crackled gently inside the hearth. The wind outside brushed against the cabin walls with long sighs, as if the night itself felt her sorrow. Slowly, cautiously, Mei Lin stepped deeper into the cabin. It smelled of pine wood, leather, and something warm, fresh bread, maybe? A simple table stood near the fire, and on it lay the small, wrapped parcel Daniel had pointed to earlier. Mei Lin didn't touch it. Instead, she stood stiff and silent, waiting because in her mind, gifts from men had a price, and she had no idea what that price would be here. Daniel cleared his throat softly. "You're safe here." Mei Lin didn't lift her eyes, but her hands clenched. The words sounded kind, but kindness was something she no longer trusted. He tried again. "No one will hurt you. Not while you're under my roof." Still, she said nothing. The English she knew was limited, enough to understand some phrases, but fear alone was enough to choke her voice. Daniel didn't press her. Instead, he moved to the far side of the cabin, removed his coat, and took a seat at the table. He didn't block the doorway. He didn't crowd her. He just sat quietly, showing her that she had space to breathe. For a long time, the cabin fell into a peaceful silence, broken only by the storm outside and the occasional pop from the firewood. Mei Lin eventually drifted toward the heat, drawn by instinct. She sat on a small stool Daniel kept near the hearth. The glow softened her features, revealing how exhausted and fragile she truly was. Daniel watched her quietly, but not in the way men usually watched her. His gaze wasn't possessive, greedy, or entitled. It was concerned, genuinely concerned, as if she were a person, not a transaction. That alone was enough to unsettle her. After several minutes, Daniel finally spoke again. I know what they told you. I know how you came here. But I need you to understand something important. Mei Lin stiffened. Daniel continued, his voice calm. I did pay the broker. But I did not buy you. Her eyes snapped up at that, confused, disbelieving, desperate for clarity. Daniel leaned back in his chair. What I bought was your freedom from him. The words struck her like a bell. Freedom? Freedom from the same men who forced her onto the ship? Freedom from a marriage contract she never asked for? She didn't speak, but her breathing grew uneven. Daniel saw he needed to explain more clearly. I don't want a wife who was forced. I don't want a woman who fears me. I just wanted to help one person escape what those men were doing. He paused, then added gently, if you want to stay here as long as you need, you can. If you want to leave when you're ready, I won't stop you. Mei Lin's throat tightened. She didn't fully understand the deeper meaning of every word, but the tone, the softness, she understood that. She stared at him, searching for deception. It didn't make sense. Why would a Western man pay money for a bride only to say he didn't want her? Daniel must have sensed her confusion because he added, I've seen what happens to the women they bring here. I wasn't about to let them decide your fate. For the first time since her arrival, Mei Lin's eyes softened slightly. Not completely. Not enough to be called trust. But something inside her loosened just a fraction. Daniel nodded toward the gift again. That's yours. You can open it whenever you're ready. Mei Lin hesitated, then reached for the small package. Her fingers trembled as she untied the piece of twine. Inside the wrapping was a folded piece of fabric, a winter shawl, soft and warm, made of deep red wool. A color she recognized from home. A color of celebration, luck, protection. She pressed it gently to her cheek. It was warm already. Daniel smiled faintly. You were shivering at the station. Thought you might need something warmer. It was such a simple gift. So small. Yet to Mei Lin it felt impossibly generous. Not because of its value, but because of its intention. No hidden threat. No unspoken demand. Just kindness. Mei Lin's eyes grew wet, though she tried her hardest to blink away the tears. Crying in front of men was dangerous back home or here. But here, Daniel didn't react with annoyance or discomfort. Instead, he quietly stood, walked to a nearby cupboard, and retrieved a cup of warm tea he had brewed earlier. He placed it gently on the table near her. Drink. It's ginger. Good for cold nights. She stared at the cup, stunned. He wasn't angry. He wasn't impatient. He wasn't grabbing her or raising his voice. He was treating her like a guest. After a long pause, Mei Lin whispered her first word since arriving, Why? Daniel took a slow breath. Because everyone deserves a choice. Those 5 words changed something in her core. Even if she didn't fully trust him yet, even if she remained terrified of the entire world she'd been thrown into, those 5 words planted a seed of safety, a seed of respect, a seed of possibility. That night, Daniel did something even more shocking than the gift. He took a blanket, wished her good night with a nod, and slept in the barn, giving her the cabin entirely to herself. No man she had ever known had done something like that. In one night. Daniel Carter showed Mei Lin something she had not felt since childhood, the beginning of hope. Snow fell steadily over the Carter Ranch the next morning, blanketing the earth in soft silence. Mei Lin woke with a start, forgetting for a moment where she was. The cabin air was warmer than she expected. Daniel had kept the fire alive through the night before leaving for the barn. She sat up slowly, wrapped in the red shawl he had given her, the warmth settling around her shoulders like a gentle embrace she didn't yet know how to accept. For the first time since she had left home, she slept without fear of footsteps approaching her door. The morning was quiet. She could hear the faint rhythmic sounds of Daniel tending to his horse's muffled neighing, the scrape of a shovel, the steady crunch of boots in the snow. Mei Lin hesitated before opening the door. The cold air kissed her face sharply as she stepped outside. Daniel noticed her immediately but didn't approach. "Morning," he said simply. Mei Lin gave a small nod. He kept working, giving her space, allowing her to observe him safely. She saw him moving with a steady confidence, strong hands, calm movements, no sudden gestures. The horses trusted him. They nuzzled into his coat as he brushed them, and he spoke softly to them as if talking to old friends. Mei Lin had never been around horses. In her village, life revolved around rice fields and riverbanks. Here, she was surrounded by mountains and snow and animals larger than any she had ever seen. Everything was new. Everything was frightening. Everything was possible. Daniel eventually paused. "You hungry?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "I made breakfast. If you want to eat, it's on the table." He didn't walk beside her. He didn't guide her. He simply returned to work and let her choose for herself. Inside the cabin, a simple meal waited: warm bread, a pot of porridge, and a small dish of dried berries. Mei Lin sat slowly and ate what she could. Though every sound made her flinch, old instinct from weeks of captivity among brokers and strangers. But something in the air felt different. After breakfast, Mei Lin cleaned the table. She didn't know if she was supposed to. No one had ordered her. But work was familiar, and familiarity felt safe. When Daniel finally entered the cabin, rubbing snow off his coat, he paused when he saw her tidying. "You don't have to do that," he said gently. She lowered her gaze. "I help," she whispered. Daniel nodded, accepting her choice but not exploiting it. "Only if you want to." The hours passed quietly. Mei Lin stayed near the fire, folding her shawl, tracing its texture, letting the warmth thaw a small part of her spirit. Daniel chopped wood outside, repaired a fence post, shoveled a path through the snow, but he never once asked her for anything. He never demanded obedience or affection or repayment. In the afternoon, he returned and knocked before entering another small act that shocked her. She had never known a man who knocked on his own door. Inside, he carried a stack of books, old but well kept. He set them on the table. "These are for you," he said. Mei Lin blinked in confusion. "You can read, right? Chinese or English?" I read. "Little English," she whispered. "That's fine. We'll start slow." He opened one of the books, a children's reader with simple words and drawings. He pointed to the first line. When she hesitated, he smiled softly. "No rush." A strange feeling rose in Mei Lin's chest, something she hadn't felt in months. The feeling of being treated as a human being, not an object. For the next hour, he sat across the table, not beside her, guiding her through small phrases. She stumbled often, cheeks flushing with embarrassment, but Daniel never laughed or showed frustration. When she pronounced a word correctly, he nodded in encouragement. When she made mistakes, he repeated the word slowly until she picked it up. Learning with him didn't feel like obligation. It felt like possibility. Later that evening, as the fire glowed warmly, Daniel reached into a drawer and placed a folded paper on the table. "This is yours," he said. Mei Lin unfolded it carefully. Her breath caught in her throat. It was the marriage contract, the one the broker had forced her into. Daniel continued quietly. "You're not bound to me anymore. I had it annulled this morning with the town clerk." Her heart pounded. She looked up at him, stunned. "You are a free woman now, Mei Lin. Not my property. Not anyone's. Free." A word she had never dared to dream of. She touched the contract with trembling fingers. Tears filled her eyes again, but something was different this time. The tears held relief instead of terror. He added gently, "If you want to stay here, you're welcome." If you want to build a life somewhere else, I'll help you get there. Mei Lin clutched the shawl around her shoulders. Why? Help me? The question came out barely above a whisper. Daniel took a slow breath. Because I know what it's like to lose everything. Mei Lin stared at him. Startled, Daniel rarely spoke about himself. But now his eyes softened with a shadowed memory. My wife died 3 winters ago, he said quietly, looking into the fire. She got sick. Too sick for any doctor to help. He swallowed. Since then, Christmas hasn't meant anything to me. I lived alone, worked alone, ate alone. Mei Lin felt something shift inside her empathy. Compassion, a connection she hadn't expected. Daniel continued. When I saw how those brokers treated women, trading them like cattle, I couldn't just stand by. I didn't buy you to become my wife. I bought you so no one else would. His voice grew softer. I just didn't want another Christmas to pass without doing something good for someone. The fire crackled gently between them. For the first time, Mei Lin lifted her gaze fully. She studied him not with fear, but with sincere curiosity. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't impatient. He wasn't entitled. He was a man healing from grief. She was a woman healing from trauma. And somehow, fate had placed them under the same snow-covered roof. That night, when Daniel left the cabin again to sleep in the barn, Mei Lin watched him through the frosted window. A part of her, small but growing, felt safe with him nearby. Another part felt grateful. And the deepest part felt something she didn't yet have words for. But she knew this. The cowboy she had been forced to marry was the first person in her new world who had given her the freedom to choose. Winter deepened over the Carter Ranch. The snow no longer frightened Mei Lin. Instead, it became part of her new rhythm. Every morning she woke in the warm cabin, the red shawl wrapped around her shoulders, and listened to the gentle sounds of Daniel tending to the horses. Every evening she read a little more English, cooked simple meals, and learned the quiet peace of the prairie night. She was no longer a prisoner of fear. But she was not yet free of the past either. Still, the ranch had become a sanctuary, a place where silence meant safety, not danger. A place where footsteps outside the door meant help, not harm. A place where a man's presence didn't make her shrink away. One morning, as golden sunlight filtered through the frost-covered window, Daniel knocked softly before entering. He was carrying a basket of fresh eggs. "You slept in," he said with a small smile. Mei Lin flushed. She hadn't slept peacefully in months. "I wake." "Late. Sorry." "Don't be," he replied gently. "It means you finally feel safe." The word safe warmed her more than the fire did. Her strength awakens. Over the next weeks, Mei Lin began exploring the ranch grounds. At first, she took small steps just to the porch, wrapped tightly in her shawl. Then she walked farther, touching the fences, watching the horses, feeling the cold but clean wind rush across her face. Daniel never hovered. He never guided her like a child. He simply watched from a distance, ready to step in if she slipped on the snow or grew frightened. One afternoon, she stood near the barn door while Daniel saddled a calm brown Mari named Willow. "You want to pet her?" he asked. Mei Lin hesitated. Horses were enormous, powerful creatures, nothing like the small donkeys she'd once seen in her village. But Willow lowered her head gently, waiting. Slowly, Mei Lin extended her hand. When her fingertips brushed the horse's warm muzzle, the fear melted. Daniel smiled. "She likes you." Mei Lin's lips trembled into a shy smile, a delicate, blooming thing. "I like her," she whispered. It was the first time Daniel saw her smile. It was the first time Mei Lin felt happiness in a foreign land. The first signs of comfort. As days passed, Mei Lin started helping Daniel with small tasks voluntarily. She brought warm tea to the barn. She folded blankets. She swept the cabin not out of duty, but out of gratitude. Each act felt like reclaiming pieces of her identity. Daniel noticed everything, but he never took advantage. "You don't owe me work," he often reminded her. "I know," she always answered quietly. "I do. Because I want." One evening, as the wind rattled the windows, Mei Lin sat by the fire reading aloud from a children's book. Her English was improving rapidly. Daniel sat across from her, listening intently, occasionally correcting her pronunciation. After she finished reading a sentence, she looked up shyly. "You good teacher." Daniel chuckled softly. "And you're a fast learner." A soft warmth filled the room, not firelight, not comfort, but something deeper. Something unspoken at the arrival of trouble, but peace never lasts long on the frontier. One bitter morning, a wagon appeared on the horizon. Mei Lin's heart dropped when she recognized the colors and style. It belonged to the same broker company that had brought her across the Pacific. Her hands began to tremble. She backed away from the window as if the sight alone could drag her back into captivity. Daniel stepped quickly to her side. "It's all right," he said calmly. "They can't take you." She shook her head violently, panic rising. "Paper, contract. They come back." Daniel set a steady hand near her, not touching, just close enough that she could take comfort if she wished. "Your contract is annulled. You're a free woman. They have no legal claim." The wagon stopped near the barn. Two men stepped out, hard-eyed, greedy, the same type who had controlled her fate months ago. They looked around the ranch with bold entitlement. Daniel stepped outside, closing the door behind him so Mei Lin wouldn't have to see their faces. She pressed her ear to the wood. "We're missing one girl from our shipment," one of the men said. "Heard she ended up here somehow." Daniel's voice remained firm and steady. "There's no girl for you here." "She owes us," the man insisted. "Her family never finished paying to travel." "No," Daniel cut in sharply. "You're not taking her." There was a long silence, followed by a thud. As if one man had stepped closer. "Women like her don't get to choose where they live." The broker growled. Daniel's reply was ice cold. "On my land." "They do." Mei Lin felt tears burn her eyes. No one had ever defended her like that. The men finally left angry, muttering threats, but defeated. Daniel re-entered the cabin and found Mei Lin crying silently by the door. Not out of fear, out of overwhelming relief. He knelt slightly, keeping his distance. "You're safe," he repeated softly. Mei Lin reached out hesitantly and placed her hand on his forearm. Her first voluntary touch. "Thank you," she whispered. Not because he saved her life, but because he recognized her humanity. The Christmas festival in town a week later. The small frontier town prepared for its annual Christmas gathering bonfires. Music, warm food, and decorations lining the wooden streets. Daniel asked Mei Lin if she wanted to go. Her first instinct was fear. Too many strangers. Too many eyes. Too many memories, but then she looked at the red shawl. At the annulled contract. At the warm cabin that had become home. Slowly, she nodded. "I want go." Daniel didn't offer his arm. He simply walked beside her as an equal. When they arrived at the festival, the townspeople turned, some curious, some surprised. A few whispered. Though Chinese communities existed in mining towns, this frontier town had never seen a woman from the east dressed in bright red wool, walking beside a gentle cowboy. But Daniel stood proudly at her side, ensuring no one treated her poorly. When some curious children approached, Mei Lin knelt to show them how to fold a tiny paper crane. Their laughter made her heart swell. For the first time since leaving China, she felt like she belonged somewhere, a new decision born from courage. Later that night, under lanterns and falling snow, Daniel asked gently, "Would you like to stay here? On the ranch? Not as a debt, not as property, as someone who deserves a home." Mei Lin looked at him, her breath misting in the cold air. She touched her shawl, touched her heart, touched her own growing strength. I choose? Stay, she whispered. And in that moment, her choice wasn't about fear or survival. It was about trust, fragile, beautiful trust. It was about a future she had never imagined she would be allowed to choose. A Christmas miracle born not of gifts or tradition, but of dignity restored. The first Christmas that Mei Lin spent at the Carter Ranch dawned like a painting, soft, cold light spilling over the snow-covered hills, reflecting in the icy branches of the trees surrounding the cabin. Inside, the fire glowed warmly, illuminating the red shawl she had worn every day since her arrival. That shawl, a simple gift from Daniel, had become a symbol of something she had long thought impossible: care without expectation, kindness without strings. It represented choice, freedom, and the first semblance of safety she had felt in months. Daniel Carter had spent the morning preparing breakfast, as he always did, and Mei Lin had joined him willingly. Not out of obligation, but out of desire to be useful, to connect, and to start embracing life beyond fear. They had laughed quietly over simple mishaps: a spilled cup of tea, burnt toast, a cat that darted across the floor in pursuit of crumbs. The sound of genuine laughter, unaccompanied by threats or orders, felt alien to Mei Lin. She paused mid-laugh, feeling warmth blossom in her chest for the first time since being sold. The unexpected visitor, just as the two were finishing their breakfast, a shadow fell across the cabin doorway. Mei Lin froze. Her mind immediately leaped back to her terrifying journey across the ocean, the brokers, the contracts, the fear of losing her freedom. She instinctively backed away, but Daniel stepped forward calmly, blocking her from fear's grasp. He gestured with a steady hand for her to remain inside. At the door stood a town official, a formal man in black coat and hat, carrying a neatly folded piece of paper. Mr. Carter, he called politely, I have a visitor for your property today. Daniel opened the door fully, keeping his posture firm. And who might that be? He asked. The official smiled faintly. It's about the young lady you rescued, the one who was supposed to be married by contract. Word has reached me that you've annulled her agreement. Mei Lin's heart skipped a beat. She had heard murmurs of the law in English lessons from Daniel, but she had never imagined a town official arriving in person to discuss her situation. She instinctively clutched the red shawl around her shoulders. The official unfolded the document he carried. The contract has indeed been voided, he confirmed, addressing Daniel. Under the law, she is free to remain wherever she chooses. It seems the broker who trafficked her is no longer in business, thanks to your intervention. The town council commends your actions. Mei Lin blinked, unable to believe her ears. Freedom complete and unquestioned was officially recognized. The very thought brought tears to her eyes. The community gathers later that day. Word spread quickly through the small frontier town. The neighbors, curious and intrigued, came by to see the young Chinese woman who had been rescued by the lone cowboy. They had expected fear and sorrow, but instead they were met with grace and composure. Mei Lin greeted each visitor politely, using the English phrases she had learned from Daniel. The town children stared wide-eyed as she demonstrated, folding paper cranes, a skill from her homeland. The adults observed quietly, impressed not only by her resilience but by the dignity with which she carried herself. Daniel watched from a distance, letting her shine without interference. He knew that the true gift of this Christmas was not material. It was recognition of her courage, her freedom, and her right to choose. The cowboy's gift that evening, Daniel handed Mei Lin a small wooden box he had carved himself. Inside lay a simple set of handcrafted jewelry, a bracelet with small red beads, reminiscent of her homeland, and a tiny silver locket. This is yours, Daniel said softly. Not because you owe me anything, not because I expect anything in return. Just because Christmas is about giving, and I want to honor the person you've become." Mei Lin's hands trembled as she accepted the box. She understood immediately that this was not a transactional gift. There were no conditions, no ownership implied. It was a pure act of kindness, unlike anything she had ever known. She opened the locket carefully. Inside was a small etching of a snow-covered ranch, a horse, and a cowpoke standing tall beside it, a subtle image that mirrored the very life she was beginning to embrace. Her chest tightened with emotion. Words failed her. She finally whispered, "Thank you." Daniel nodded quietly. "You've earned every bit of happiness here. I only want you to have it." The choice after the evening's meal, Daniel invited Mei Lin to step outside. The stars were brilliant, and the snow reflected their light like countless tiny diamonds. The ranch looked serene, almost magical under the night sky. Daniel asked gently, "Mei Lin, you're free now. You can choose to stay here with me or go anywhere you like. The decision is yours entirely." Mei Lin's mind swirled. For weeks, she had been caught in a storm of fear and uncertainty. The brokers, the ocean, the journey across the West, all memories of helplessness. Yet now here she stood, feeling strength she hadn't realized she possessed. She took a deep breath. She looked at Daniel not as a master, not as a rescuer, but as a man who had shown her respect, patience, and kindness. "I stay," she said quietly, but firmly. "I choose to stay." The words were simple, but they carried immense weight. They marked the moment she reclaimed her life. Daniel's eyes softened, and for the first time, a warm smile spread across his face that wasn't tinged with caution or restraint. "You are truly welcome here," he said. A Christmas to remember the following morning. The ranch prepared for a quiet Christmas celebration. Daniel and Mei Lin decorated the cabin with evergreen branches, strung candles in the windows, and hung a small wreath over the door. For the first time, the holiday felt warm and real to Mei Lin, not a reminder of loss or debt, but of choice and belonging. Neighbors arrived with simple gifts, baked goods, small trinkets, and cheerful greetings. Mei Lin offered thanks and shy smiles, fully participating in the first Christmas she had ever chosen to celebrate. When the sun set behind the snow-covered hills, Daniel handed her the red shawl once more. Mei Lin draped it around her shoulders, feeling the warmth and love it symbolized. The townfolk watched in admiration, whispering among themselves about the unlikely duo, the solitary cowboy and the young woman who had traveled thousands of miles, forced into a marriage only to find safety, friendship, and respect. It was a story that would become legendary in the frontier town, a tale of courage, kindness, and the power of freedom. The lasting gift, the true shock of the Christmas gift, was not the shawl, the locket, or Daniel's act of protection. It was the freedom he gave her to choose her own path, the acknowledgement of her humanity, and the respect he had shown in every gesture. For Mei Lin, this Christmas was the first in which she could celebrate as a whole person, unshackled by fear, debt, or coercion. She had been forced into a marriage she did not want, shipped across oceans, and placed in the hands of strangers. Yet, in the end, she received the gift of self-determination, compassion, and trust, the greatest gifts of all. Daniel, too, received a gift. In helping Mei Lin reclaim her freedom and teaching her to trust again, he rediscovered something he had lost years ago, the ability to hope, to feel joy, and to care deeply for another without expectation. That Christmas, under the glow of firelight and the shimmer of snow, they both understood the truth. The most shocking gift of all was the gift of a life, chosen freely and shared willingly. The story concludes with Mei Lin fully embracing her freedom and her new life, Daniel as her steadfast ally, and the frontier community bearing witness to the enduring power of kindness and choice.